My mind is not only on our service today, my mind is all the way back to the meeting, and then the Sunday school this morning, and then the beautiful service we had this afternoon. Statements in the Sunday school this morning I've still got reverberating in my mind. And that statement Sister Baer made, I hope she wasn't quoting me, because then I'm going to be quoting myself here in a second. I know some of what she was quoting was from a book that I wrote. She asked if she could use some of that, so I'm going to have to be careful because I might be quoting myself. I don't want to do that. She was talking about how there's a hole none of us can fill with anything but God. It only really can be satisfied by being filled with the Lord. And He's got to lift us out of wherever we were at to fill it. You're not going to get it filled out there. It can't be filled out there. There's nothing out there that can fill it. I tried. I really did. I tried with all my strength to fill it. I tried filling it for a few years with everything I could try to fill it with. Some things I'd never even tell you I was trying to fill it with. Now looking back on it some 40 years almost later. But I tried to fill it with almost anything but God. That's the opposite of, I love that message Brother Goodwin gave where he kept talking about these negative things happening where God saved people. He said, but God. God made that situation different. I was looking for anything but God, but not in the positive sense. I was looking for something other than God to fill that hole, and I never found anything. And I mean, I searched. I searched far and wide. I don't think I was thinking of it consciously like that. I'm not going to give myself any credit because I was a mess, but I don't think I was consciously thinking I'm trying to fill this hole in my heart with something other than God. But there's a part of you that just never feels quite right if you don't have a good relationship with the Lord. You may not realize that's what it is. It's uncomfortable, but it's one benefit of being a part of the kingdom. Once you're a part of the kingdom, you start to realize what that yearning is, what that emptiness is, what that feeling is. That's why we use these kind of verses like hungering and thirsting after righteousness. And I think Sister Baer mentioned never losing your thirst. You can't lose your thirst. We realize there's a thirst when we come to the kingdom. We realize that there's only one thing that can quench it. And then we want to keep close to the fountain of life because that's where our thirst can be quenched. In that place where the Word and the Spirit are flowing forth. I had one of the ministers just this week send me a question about the Word of God, and it was a very deep question about the symbolism and way symbolism is used in the Bible, and whether the Word of God could be symbolized by water like the Spirit is symbolized by water. I can remember years and years ago, Brother Moore guy got into really interesting. I think we probably were traveling to or from a minister's meeting, really got deep into studying that out. And that verse came out from Deuteronomy that His Word, His doctrine would drop as the dew, distill as the dew. And His Word to be like that water of the dew that comes from heaven that's on the green grass, you know. That's part of what gives it life. In fact, it looks like, it appears that you read between the lines of some of the statements, especially going through Genesis 9, it appears that that must have been the way God was operating the creation prior to the flood. It made it sound like there really wasn't the kind of rain that we have now where it was just dew. He just let enough dew settle that it gave that kind of life. They didn't need a great outpouring of the rain like we might need now. Because everything was balanced in the beginning. Everything was in its right balance. You didn't have long periods of dry spaces where now you're going to need an outpouring of rain to get the ground dealt with. You had a constant sustaining of whatever was needed. That's the kind of relationship God wanted with us from the beginning. A sustained relationship where there's no breaks, there's no division, there's no problem between you and the Lord. There's a constant connection. As long as we're in a constant connection, we're safe. So He lifted us out of the deep miry clay, and He planted our feet in a heavenly way, didn't He? This is a heavenly way that we're in right now where He's planted our feet. This is a heavenly way. A way is just a path. We keep using this word process. That's what a path is. You're going through a way that's going to produce something. You keep traveling down the way, it'll end up producing something in your life. You keep on the way, keep in the way. And I was thinking about that necessity for us to be salt and light that my wife was speaking about. You're never going to be able to be salt and light until some things change in your life because you won't be salt and light. Salt and light are things that have to be processed. There's got to be some things that happen to you for you to be salt and light. You've got to be striving to be salt and light from the very beginning. I think I was talking to Brother Chappell this week. He was talking about the book that he's reading, which is an excellent book. I'm going to say that with a caveat. The caveat or qualification, maybe a better word, is that the individual's concept of salvation is not the way we see it. It's a Calvinistic type of view, but a book called Knowing God. The theme of the book is an extremely important theme. The idea is there's a lot more to knowing God than just knowing about God. You could know everything there is well, no, you couldn't. You might try. He said, who can by searching find out God? You're not going to do it. You can't find out the Almighty in any kind of human carnal understanding. But knowing God is different from just knowing about God. You could know every single scripture in the Bible. You might have a photographic memory. You know every single scripture in the Bible about God's personality, characteristics, power. You could talk about his omniscience or his omnipotence or his omnipresence, which those words, one of them's found in the King James Version, but those words are not really biblical. The concept behind them is biblical, but those are Greek terms for a concept of how they believe the divinity to be, and I think they're probably correct, but we have to make sure we understand them. We need to understand God's omniscience from a biblical perspective. What does it mean that God knows all things? Do I not need to do anything from this point forward because he already knows what I'm going to do, so it's going to happen whether I like it or not? So you can confuse some things in your theology if you don't get it right. We want to know more about God, but the idea behind the book, which is a great idea, is that it's not enough to know about God. You've got to come to know him, the way the Hebrew word means that in its earlier examples in Genesis, to have an intimate knowledge of somebody, to know somebody, not just intellectually, but experientially, through experience rather than just through intellect. I could probably spend weeks on end talking about God and going through scriptures in the Bible to tell you all about God, but that doesn't mean you know him any better when I'm done. And I might not know him any better doing all the talking about him. You've got to come into a relationship with him that teaches you something about him that's different than just information. It's got to be experience. That's why I said about Moses that God showed his acts, his deeds, the children of Israel, but his ways he showed to Moses. Moses got to understand why he did things the way he did. That's pretty important because watching that someone does things might teach you something about, well, they do things with power or whatever it might be. But if you understand why God does things, it might help you to get in harmony with him. God does this because. Well, if he does that because of this reason, I want to get my heart in the same kind of rhythm with his heart. I want my heart beating in rhythm with God's. Not counter to it, not skipping a beat here and there. I don't want some kind of carnal pacemaker to keep me in line with God. God, just change my heart. Give me a heart like yours. That's what has to happen. We've got to have something changed where we can become the salt and light that my wife was talking about this morning. We've got to have that kind of change going on in our lives, and things just have to be different than they were before. I got a kick out of a story I heard one of the sisters told. I'd never heard her tell this story. I'm not going to tell you who it was. She can tell the story on her own if she feels comfortable, but I got such a kick out of it, I have to tell it. This is a precious sister that's the last person you would ever think would be telling this story, and you'll understand that in a minute. She is one of the sweetest sisters in the church. She was telling a story that when she first got a car, her great dream was to get one of those ichthus. Do you know what an ichthus is? That's that little fish symbol you see on cars that represents Christianity. It was one of the earliest symbols in the Christian church that they used. They'd put on tombs, they'd put in places where they would carve it. It looks like a little fish symbol. There's a complicated linguistic reason for that because the letters for that are the same as the letters for Christ and some other things. But the point is that people would use that symbol to represent a Christian. So you see people with that symbol they'd put on the bumper of their car. Then somebody came along and put one with teeth and put Darwin on it or something, I think, Aaron. And then I love that so far the Christians got the last word. I saw somebody else had one that shows the Darwin fish, and coming behind it's this giant Jesus fish about to eat the Darwin fish. But I thought, I don't know if that's quite the right spirit, is he's going to eat the Darwin fish. He'd probably be trying to save him out of their nonsense. But this precious sister was saying that she badly wanted one of those fish symbols for the back of her car. I guess she got it for her car, if I understand the story right. And she had so many instances of road rage that she felt embarrassed that she had it on her car, so she took the fish off her car. The humor of it is, that's not what needed to change. It wasn't the fish that's the problem. I know I can't change my road rage, so let me make sure no one knows I'm a Christian while I'm giving them evil looks or whatever. No, that's not the solution to that problem. We've got to get rid of the problem, don't we? Then whenever we have a label where someone's labeling us and saying, that's a Christian, people will say, what I'm seeing is different. It's not just a label, but there's some reality to the label. It was always one of the most heartbreaking testimonies I've ever heard. I don't think it's legitimate because he could have found somebody, but one of the testimonies of Gandhi was he said he would have been a Christian instead of what he became, Mahatma Gandhi, but he said he never could find a real Christian. That's pretty sad if that's the state. We have to be the real thing, don't we? I had on my mind not only the salt and light that she was talking about, but I also had how important it is for us to be a lighthouse. When we were singing some of these songs this afternoon, Brother Moore said this, that it was one of those little quips. I don't know if he heard it or he invented it, but I loved it. He said, not privatized, but publicized. Amen to that. Yeah. You know what privatized is? That's when you make it your little private possession, and it's like trademarking something. I don't want you using that phrase. That's my phrase. So don't you dare use it unless you pay me some royalties, you know. You better pay me a few bucks. You're going to use my... Wouldn't that be a shame? Imagine if a minister privatized his messages and said, oh, hold on, Jim, you're quoting me now. Give me a couple bucks for my royalties for that. That'd be a shame, wouldn't it? There's an example of arrogance, isn't it? Or at least greed, maybe. Whole lot of problems with that, isn't it? We don't privatize it. It's not ours. It's not ours to privatize. The church is to be a lighthouse. I realize we sing the song, The Lighthouse. That song is a beautiful song, powerful song. It focuses on Jesus being the lighthouse, but really we're the lighthouse. He's the light. He's the light, we're the lighthouse. If you take the light out of the lighthouse has no purpose. It's just a plinth, a pillar. Someone could live in it, a little tower they want to live in, by the seaside. But it isn't serving its purpose if the light is not present. But it's not just the light has to be present. We can't privatize the light and say, you know what? If you're a ship out there that wants to make sure you're not going to hit the shore, send by Venmo so many dollars and we'll turn the light on in the lighthouse. Wouldn't that be a shame? And you don't have any money, come back from your fishing haul and you didn't catch any fish and there ain't no money to send any Venmo, Jay, and you get a little message, a little text message. You're getting near to the shore. If you want the light of the lighthouse, Venmo such and such money. Well, that'd be a shame, wouldn't it? That's not how it works. We're not privatizing this message. We're not privatizing truth. Truth is the most powerful catalytic agent in the world. Last thing we want to do is keep it hoarded up when the world needs it so bad. This world needs the change. We need it. We need it. But this world needs it too. And I'm going to tell you an interesting thing. Part of what will help us become who we need to be is helping those who don't have what we have. That's part of the processing that we need, is that you cannot just do this inside of a hut somewhere. I had somebody one time say to me, the way they thought the process of salvation worked, they said, I think the best thing I could do, they didn't mean it literally, but I think the best thing I could do is go live in a cave on a mountainside somewhere, get away from this world. That way I wouldn't be tempted by all the things of this world. I wouldn't have to worry about all the sights and sounds and glitter of this world, all the temptations. And there are things all around us, bombarding us all the time, aren't there? From every type of emotion you could imagine is coming at you all the time. If you get out in this world at all, if you're walking down the street, if you're in the grocery store, every kind of craziness is being presented all the time. Some things you might find ludicrous and some things you might actually be attracted to are bombarding you all the time. So this person said, I think I could be an overcomer if I just got up in a mountain in a cave. I said, well, first of all, you wouldn't even be able to overcome yourself up there. But we don't have to just overcome ourselves, we have to overcome the world. I don't know, it's going to upset anyone's equilibrium here in this assembly, but this is my view. I believe we've got three things we've got to overcome. We've got to overcome the world, the flesh, and the devil. And I don't combine the flesh and the devil. I think there is something out there beyond us that we have to overcome. I do believe we can overcome it by overcoming the greatest enemy we have, that's us. You can overcome the world the same way, if you can really overcome yourself. But see, you'll never know if you've overcome if you disconnect, if you blind yourself, so to speak, and you can't see anything. You don't know if you've overcome. You couldn't possibly know if you've overcome unless you can stand in the midst of the storm and you're still on your feet when the storm passes. And I don't mean by just the merit of your own strength. I mean by holding on to God, and you make it through whatever you have to go through, and you make it through better than you went in. That's always the goal, is to make it out better than you went in. So you be stronger on the other side. So this salt and light that Sister Baer was talking about this afternoon, or I used this word a minute ago, catalytic agents. Catalytic agents. Now the only reason you might know that word, most people don't talk about catalytic things anymore, but now that platinum has become so extremely valuable, people are ripping off old catalytic converters because there's some little element of that in there. You can make some money doing it. Don't go trying it, all right? Don't go stealing people's catalytic converters in their old cars. But people have made money doing that. A catalyst is something you introduce into what might be a mixture of some kind that changes the entire thing it touches, but it doesn't change. It stays what it was to begin with, but it is so powerful. This is the goal of the Christian life. It's so powerful that you can put it anywhere and it won't change. There's nothing powerful enough to stop its force. When you put it in there, it's going to start changing everything around it. That's why the world has had to kill Christians. Yeah. The reason they've had to kill Christians is because the catalytic force of true Christianity starts to affect them, and they don't want it affecting them, so they have to kill the messenger so the message won't change them, or so they won't feel the burden of the change. They don't want the guilt, see? They don't want anyone to tell them you've got to be different. You can't be like this, which is a sad thing. Wouldn't you want to be saved? People get angry and say, how dare you say that somebody shouldn't live this kind of lifestyle? I'm not saying it because I have some personal agenda against them. I'm saying it because I love them and I want to save them. I don't want to see them trapped in something like that and end up dying in their sins. So we have to be catalysts To be catalysts, we've got to grow to the place, and all of us have to. I'm striving for it myself. I'm not at this place fully yet. We've all got to grow to the place where we're strong enough that nothing around us is going to change us from our convictions. We're going to hold our convictions. We're going to remain obedient to the Lord. That's where you can truly become salt and light, because the world can look at you and say, whatever you do. Salt and light are both this way, you know. You know, one of the interesting things about salt is they talk about adulterating salt, if you want to use that word, or lessening its potency. It's not that you change the salt. You can't change the salt. It's just that you mix it with so many other things that whatever it is you're putting on there, you got other things in there that lessens the potency of the salt. But the salt crystals didn't change. They're still salt. It's just you have so much that's not salt mixed into the pile with it that whatever you've put on there is only 20% salt, so it doesn't have its power. You've lessened its power, but the salt hasn't changed. Light's even more of a beautiful example of that. Light is not something that is affected by darkness. Light affects darkness. Darkness can't affect light, because as long as there is light, there cannot be darkness. I don't mean outside of the range of the light, but as long as there is light, within the range of that light, there can exist no darkness. But if there's darkness, all it takes is one small light, and darkness has been driven back. Light is far more powerful than darkness. That's why in the very beginning, God did this, I think, very literally. I think He literally created this way. But I think there's deep, powerful insights in it as well. Very first thing God did before He made anything else. You think if evolution is true, He would have done all kinds of other things first, but that's not the order He took. He didn't take the order that we see in evolution where there's all these changes. He started with the two most important things, light and darkness. Everything was dark. There was no life at all because there had to be light for there to be life, just like in the spiritual realm. He started with darkness. There was darkness. And then He spoke and said, let there be light. Several times this meeting, Brother Richard and I, every time I got to sit close to him this meeting, every time that we got to that point in that song where it said He sent forth His word, I felt the Spirit ripple down the row that we were in. I thought, my Lord, there's something in that phrase. I so appreciate when we have these poetic phrases. They add so much more of a layer than if someone just said, God said. That's pretty powerful. God said is enough for anything, isn't it? But when you add some poetry to it, it adds more of a punch that's more emotionally stirring to us. And I think God intends it. It's like in Isaiah 9 where it says He sent a word and it lighted. Well, lighted is not a word we use this way too often. Unless you're talking about a bird coming down on a tree limb, it lighted on the tree limb. Lighted just means it came down and settled there. It came down from somewhere higher and just settled down like a bird flying and landing on a branch. God sent forth a word and it lighted upon Israel. Or God sent forth His word and it healed them. Pretty powerful statements, isn't it? He just sent it forth. That's one of the things that was on my mind in this meeting. When I was speaking, I didn't go into it because I just had a few things I wanted to say. My heart was stirred by those songs and I wanted to say something about them. But one of the things that was on my mind, if I had let loose and taken off, I might have gotten into this because it was so heavy on my mind. This whole point of God sending forth His word. And then in Isaiah, when He makes that statement, He said, so shall my word be that goeth forth out of my mouth. It shall not return unto me void, but it shall prosper in the thing whereunto I sent it. There's more to it than that. And He goes on to some really powerful pictures of trees and hills shouting and singing and really powerful descriptions. But it'll accomplish that which I please, and it'll prosper in the thing whereunto I sent it. God's word is a powerful thing, isn't it? That's one reason we have to be the kind of example we are, because we are bearers of the word. He said that about Israel, didn't He? He said that He gave them the oracles of God. They were the mouthpieces. They were the ones who God had given the truth to, and it was their responsibility to be mouthpieces to the world about God. We're to be mouthpieces to the world about God. Going back to the picture of a lighthouse. A lighthouse without a light in it isn't a lighthouse at all, is it? And it's not just the light in the lighthouse. You could have a light inside the lighthouse. I said this when we were going through the Sermon on the Mount. It was on my mind because some things I was having some conversations. There was some dissension going back and forth between some ministers. Not all of them were part of our body, but kind of a mixture of ones in our body and out of the body. And I don't mean that like Paul meant. I mean out of the body, this body. There was kind of a discussion going back and forth about the degree to which we should be sharing truths, whether or not we should just be openly sharing truths, and whether we definitely should. You know, there were different views of that going in this discussion, and it really hit me that we do believe we're a lighthouse. I've even heard people call their churches lighthouses sometimes, and rightly so if they are. In order to be a lighthouse, there has to be a light, doesn't there? Usually it's up in the very top of the lighthouse for obvious reasons, where they've got that circular pan of windows in the older lighthouses. And you go back to the ancient enough lighthouse, there are all kinds of ways they lit them. They'd have just fires and torches and all kinds of things. But as they started to develop reflective things like mirrors they'd put in there and magnifiers, and it gets really complicated on how they could cause that light to look a lot more than what it was just in its, say, a flame or whatever. They magnified that light and they reflected it so that you could see it further away. Would it be a lighthouse in any true sense if the light was in there but all the windows were shuttered so no light could be seen outside? That was the question. I didn't think of it in some strategic way, Andy. I was getting kind of bombarded and immediately it just hit me. What kind of lighthouse has its windows closed? Somebody was, bless the Lord, such and such. They were talking about their church as a lighthouse. The lighthouse to the world, lighthouse to, they were talking about more than just the world. I won't get into it, but they're making some big statements about their church, and they're not very evangelistic. They were getting kind of forceful about it. I said, what kind of lighthouse has its windows closed? Is it a lighthouse if they've shuttered the windows? See, the windows have to be open. The light has to go out. We have to be good lighthouse keepers, though, because if the light that's going out isn't clean light, it's not bright light, it's not reflected properly, then perhaps we'll be more of a danger than a good. We've got to be productive and not dangerous. Whatever we're offering to people has to be something that'll help them, be a benefit to them. Darkness is not a danger to light. That was the other argument someone was making when we were having this conversation. They said, there's a lot of darkness out there. It'll swallow up the light. You don't want that out there. How's it going to do that? How will darkness swallow up the light? It can't swallow up the light unless the light is allowed to go out, and that's the exact problem. We cannot let the light go out. We have to keep the light burning. We have to keep the light bright. We've got to make sure that our light is, as I said, clean and it's clear and all those other things that you could use to describe it. Is that Ecclesiastes 2:13, Brother Thrasher, where it talks about wisdom excelling folly as light excels darkness? Excels there just means surpasses it. Light surpasses darkness. Darkness can't surpass light. Darkness can never overcome light. That's why we've got to keep our light burning. That's why it seems like the Lord's been inspiring some of the subjects we've been on about our spirit being right. Whatever form that comes, whether we're talking about something like arrogance or critical spirit or so many others we could talk about, or the positive side of them, because we never want to leave it without the positive side. Looking at some of those beautiful statements about humility, here's a good one for you. Humble yourself. You know what arrogance wants, right? It wants to be exalted. Humble yourself under the mighty hand of God. Then what? What's the result of doing that? He'll exalt you in due time, won't he? Which means if you want exalted, you're going to have to be humble. But the problem is it has to be real humility for it to be real exaltation. So there really is no exaltation, I mean being lifted up. There's no being lifted up to a greater place than God until you have real humility. So whatever you're being lifted up to do isn't really being exalted, except self-exaltation. God help us. So he can exalt us. He will exalt us if we do things as he expects us to do. But this light and this salt that we've got is something that has to not only be working in us, it's got to work through us. It's got to affect other people. I'm hoping we can keep that flowing because I'd like to see our assembly just keep growing. Hope we can keep it growing. There'll always be challenges along the way. There'll be personality conflicts. There'll be differences of doctrine. There'll be differences of traditions and things when people come in a church where we need to be gentle. We need to be patient. We need to be considerate of the fact that people may not have had all our history. We've got a great blessing. Many of us sitting here, not everybody because we've all come in different places, different times. But many of us sitting here have had the tremendous asset of being able to sit under a lot of teaching and watching a lot of good examples. That's a great asset. And I don't just mean just teaching. That's just one example. I mean the examples of people's lives. There's certain strengths that I have because I can look back at the example of people's lives that went before me and say, I saw how they handled certain things and I want to have that same spirit. And it'll take some work to get it. It'll take some work on my part. It'll take some work on God's part because some things only God can do. And there's some processes that are up to God to take you through when he feels like you can survive it. You're lucky he doesn't take you through things you can't survive. He takes us through things he knows we can survive. Scripture says he always leaves a window, effectively. There's room for escape. Now, that doesn't mean escape from being right or in a relationship with him. That means there's always an escape valve. There's always a place that God knows exactly how much you can take. Sometimes you can take a lot more than you think you can take. I've learned the hard way that you can do a lot more than you think you can do most of the time in terms of your growth. It's just that we don't want to. There's a desire in us to find a lower gear, Let me see if I can find a lower gear. So this isn't as stressful. It isn't as difficult. But we want to make sure that we're making the changes that are necessary for us to keep going on. So God help us to be a light. Help salt to be developed in our spirit. I like that phrase too. Somebody has a salty spirit. Of course, as my wife said this morning, that usually is not a positive in most cultures where they use it. It's somebody that's a little feisty, somebody that's a little edgy in their personality. They tend to be easily angered or at least easily agitated or aggravated or whatever word you want. We all have the potential to be a little salty, but we need to be salty in the spiritual way so that the Lord can use us to flavor and season this earth. But we have to be light too. Started saying this song, The Lighthouse. It's true that Jesus is the lighthouse, but that's really not the best definition of the lighthouse. We're the lighthouse. Jesus is the light, and we have to be good demonstrators of Christ, because Christ isn't standing here in front of everybody. We are. That puts a great weight on our shoulders, don't you think? Sure. The fact that Jesus is not standing here in person where we can stand back and say, look at him, isn't he wonderful? That'd be the easy route. The disciples, in the first 3.5 years of Jesus' existence, on the earth at least, first 3.5 years of his human life, the disciples could have stood there, and anytime somebody said, what's the right way to go, they could have just done one of these. Look at him. There's an old Jewish phrase that you follow in the dust of the rabbi, which is just to say, the better of a disciple you are, you get so close to your teacher that you're in his dust. The dust his sandals are kicking up is getting on you, because that's how close you follow your teacher. And they could have picked out their teacher and said, there he is. But see, when Jesus goes back to the Father, now he needs to be able to point down here and say, there I am. The world needs to see us and want to be in a relationship with the Lord because of seeing him in us. And so the things that the Lord gives us are intended not just for us, they're intended for this world. This is a sin-sick world that needs the Lord. And I promise you, if we have a love for that mission, we will keep growing. As long as we have a love for that mission and we have a love for whoever the Lord brings in through that work. You've got to have both those things going on, because you have to love the work and you got to love the product of the work. Still got this ringing through my head with what you said this afternoon about privatizing versus publicizing. Another example of that in Matthew, is that the 10th chapter, the 27th verse? I had somebody say to me one time, Andy, they said, bless the Lord, Jesus had a lot of just secret things he told his disciples. He didn't tell the whole multitude. That's true. Sort of. He actually did tell the whole multitude. He just didn't tell all of them what the interpretation was. He went out in front of thousands of people and taught things like Matthew 13 that are shocking in their depth. They seem real simple. Stories about people sowing seed, how deep is that? Oh, it's real deep. Stories about people fishing, buying a field. Come on, this is baby stuff, right? It's so baby stuff that we still are arguing over what some of it means. So it's pretty complicated. And he's out there talking about all these deep things that seem pretty simple. He was talking about some of those things, and go back to Matthew 5, 6, and 7, the Sermon on the Mount. That wasn't preached to a little tiny cadre of people. That was preached to a big group. And there were times when he took his disciples aside, and he said to them, it's not for them to receive the mysteries of the kingdom. I'm going to tell you the interpretation. But don't forget verses like this. He said, what I tell you in darkness, that speak ye in the light. In other words, what I'm telling you in secret, let's use another synonym for that. What I'm telling you secretly here on the side, I'm explaining this to you. You're going to go out and preach this openly. Yes. You're not going to go huddle up. Why wouldn't they need to know it too? You don't go huddle up. What you hear in the ear, that I'm sitting here personally, Heath, I'm all right, Heath, and we're talking real close and nobody else hearing us, go preach it on the housetops. You can't get any straighter than that. In other words, whatever it is I'm telling you that are these great secrets of the kingdom, these great truths, I expect you to take them to this world. Right now, though, they were in a training session. It'd be like somebody in college and you're teaching them. Once I teach you, I'm teaching you to be evangelists. Once I teach you, you go out there with it. Maybe we're having a closer session because I'm spending more time mentoring you so you understand what we're doing. But once you get it, go with it. That was what Brother Chappell and I were talking about. We're trying to figure out how old Charles Spurgeon was, because he wrote a book and they said he was just a very young man when he wrote this book, and they think he might have been maybe 20 years old. And he wrote one of his more powerful books. And Brother Chappell said, is that true? Could he possibly be that young when he wrote this book? We started talking about it. He was bringing this up as well, it wasn't just me. Saying, well, back in the 1800s, these guys weren't fooling around. These guys were ready for what we think is 8 or 10 years of college, by the time they're in their mid-teens. Their education, it isn't that they had greater intellectual or emotional intelligence. Well, they might have had more emotional intelligence than a lot of us. But it wasn't that they had more intellectual intelligence. It was just simply that they had better dedication. Some of those kids, their parents taught them 3 and 4 languages by the time they were teenagers. Some of those great preachers, they knew Latin and Greek and Hebrew. By the time they were 18, That's because someone was training them from a young age because they had an idea in their mind what they wanted their children to learn, and they were spending a lot of time with them. I wish as a parent that I had had the time and the intense focus to be able to do that. This is the great balancing act, brethren. The more responsibility you have in the kingdom, the harder it is. Your family will pay a price if you don't keep that balance. It's hard to keep the balance when you're being pulled from a lot of directions, and it's almost always true. It's one of those heartbreaking things most people don't know anything about unless you're in the ministry, that if you have young children in the ministry, they will probably pay the price for your ministry, and they didn't ask to pay it. That's why in some cases, I understand why some men have gone into the ministry much older. You know, we used to wait. People had to go through decades of going out to churches and things before they went into ministry. That isn't what someone like Charles Spurgeon did. I think Charles Spurgeon's first church he pastored, he was about 20 years old. And the big church that they moved from, that became the Metropolitan Tabernacle, that was his huge work, he was 27. They were accomplishing pretty powerful things at a pretty young age. But it's because of the fervency and the dedication and the discipline that it wasn't a casual thing to them. We can't let this become casual to us. We've got to realize we've got a job to do that is a crucial, critical job, and we have been called to do it. And I'd like to do what I've been called to do. You know, I pray that almost every day. I don't have any health issues that I'm aware of right now, but having been shocked like we were with some of the things that hit us that can come out of nowhere, almost every single day, I won't say almost, it is every single day. I never leave this out of my prayers at night. I always say, Lord, will you please make me a better man? But I always say, Lord, will you please finish the work that you've begun in me? Yes. Please finish it. I mean on this side of the resurrection. Please finish it. And Lord, if you've called me to do a work, please let me finish what you've called me to do. Please don't cut me short in the middle of my sentence, so to speak. Please let me finish. You know, one of the reasons he won't let us finish is if he knows we're not going to finish right. If he thinks somewhere along the path we're going to diverge, we're going to do something to hurt our testimony. God help us to be strong enough that God can look at us and say, I can let that person live to the resurrection because they won't fail me, and when the resurrection comes, they'll be ready for it. That's what we ought to be praying for. God help us, because we do have a great responsibility right now, and I'm going to say this with all humility for our assembly, because I just told you why this is a dangerous statement if you go around broadcasting it. Right now, we have a lighthouse. We have a lighthouse here. And this lighthouse has a bright light. It's shining a great distance. We're blessed that way. But see, that is not a permanent promotion. That's why we can't brag about it. We can't get big-headed if God is using us in some great way, because God can yank the carpet out anytime he wants. If we can't keep our spirit right, I'm always praying, Lord, whatever you give us, will you please give us the grace to handle it right? Whatever you give us, will you please give us the strength and the emotional intelligence to be able to handle it right? God help us.